Week 13 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few kickers I looked at off the wire this week. The first kicker, Will Lutz of the Denver Broncos. It seems like every other week he's on this list is Will Lutz, and he's still out there in tons of fantasy leagues at 79% is Will Lutz. So he's on the Denver Bronco offense. That stalls out a lot. And obviously it's a great kickers field as well in Mile High Stadium. So the last few weeks he's gone out there and put up some decent numbers. Week 10 in Kansas City was a down game too. Week 11 versus Atlanta, 9 fantasy points. And Week 12 at the Raiders, 22 fantasy points, which is always a plus in an indoor game. So Week 13 back at Mile High Stadium, their home stadium where the ball carries in the altitude. And it's a good matchup versus the Cleveland Browns, where their defense has given up tons of points this season. So Will Lutz, he's been a good kicker for many seasons, going back with the New Orleans Saints. Obviously, Sean Payton likes him a lot, and that's why they made the trade for him before the season last year. So Lutz right now, like I said, out there in 79% of fantasy leagues. Next kicker, Spencer Shader of the Kansas City Chiefs. So obviously when you're in a high-powered offense like Kansas City, opportunities are going to be there. And that's exactly been the case in the last few weeks here since he's been with the Chiefs. Week 11 at Buffalo, they just scored 3 touchdowns, only 3. And then Week 12 at Carolina, 13 fantasy points, where he hit 3 field goals and 3 extra points in that ball game. So Week 13, Black Friday, a good matchup versus the Vegas Raiders. Give up the third most fantasy points to kickers on the season. We just saw Will Lutz in Week 12's game go out there and score 22 fantasy points versus the defense. I think he's going to go out there Schrader once again. He's going to get opportunities, and this Raider team can't stop anyone. And we're not going to see Harrison Butker till Week 15, so he's got a few more weeks having the job as Schrader. And definitely anytime a kicker's on a high-powered offense, you want him on your fantasy roster. Next kicker, Cairo Santos of the Chicago Bears. So Cairo Santos out there in 91% of fantasy leagues. And I know this bad team, they've struggled over the last 5 weeks here, losing 5 in a row. But Santos, he's always been a solid kicker. He got a contract extension as well last year with Santos, and he's gone out there and made the most of his opportunities, even though it's been a down year for this Bear offense with Caleb Williams on the center in his rookie year. Week 9 at Arizona, 13. Week 10 versus the Pats, 3. Week 11 versus Green Bay, 9. And Week 12 versus the Vikings, 9 fantasy points. So Week 13, potentially they could put some points on the board, and they know they got to put points on the board at the Lions. One of the best, if not the best team overall in all pro football. So an indoor game, Thursday, quick turnaround, obviously. So I think Cairo Santos, if you need a kicker in deeper leagues, he can help. And he's out there in 91% of fantasy leagues. Next kicker, Daniel Carlson of the Vegas Raiders. Daniel Carlson, he's been a decent kicker over the last few seasons. He's on a bad offense, obviously, now with Gardner Minshew out for the season, where for the most part, their scoring is going to be on field goals, I believe. It's going to be tough for this Raider team to find the end zone, and especially at the Chiefs in Week 13. So the last few weeks here for Carlson, Week 8 versus Kansas City, 10. Week 9 at Cincinnati, 7. And Week 11 at Miami, 7. And Week 12 versus Denver, 15 fantasy points. So the points have been there, 7 or more fantasy points, 4 weeks in a row here for Daniel Carlson. And he's been always an accurate kicker. And like I said, now with Gardner Minshew down, and we'll see who's a quarterback. Maybe they sign Daniel Jones, maybe Desmond Ridder or Aiden O'Connell is available. I just think Daniel Carlson, it's going to be tough for this offense to put touchdowns on the board, and he's going to have to settle for field goals and put up points. And the fifth and final kick I looked at off the wall is John Parker Romo of the Minnesota Vikings. Parker Romo, 2 out of 3 games, he's been good for this Viking team since he's filled in for Will Richard. And this Minnesota Viking team all season long, the defense is stalled out at times, even though they've made a lot of red zone trips weekly as Minnesota. And the kickers have put up numbers. Week 10 at Jacksonville, 13. Week 11 at Tennessee, a down game because he missed an extra point, 4 fantasy points. And Week 12 at the Bears, 13 fantasy points. So Week 13, good matchup back home indoors, which is always a plus, not dealing with the elements. And it's an easier kick versus the Cardinals coming to town. 8th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So Parker Romo, he's got a good boot. He's made the most of his opportunity so far. And he's out there in 94% of fantasy leagues. That's a few kickers I looked here off the wire for Week 13 of the fantasy football season.